You love the apartment, you love where it is in the city, but it is out of your price range. So how do you decide if rent is negotiable? And if you are going to negotiate rent, how do you do it? Today, I'm going to give you 4 key tips on how to negotiate your rent and when to decide whether it's negotiable in the first place. Okay, so let's not waste time. Rent is always negotiable. What do I mean by that, right? I mean, you should always ask. The worst thing they could say is, nope, it's take it or leave it. And so I go into any kind of rent transaction with the idea of, yes, let's negotiate. So what are the 4 tips? First, before you start looking, do your market research. So let's say you're starting law school at UCLA in September. A few months before, get online and start looking at comparable apartments, where they're located, and what the rent is. The more information you have before you begin that search, the better position you're going to be in to avoid getting taken advantage of and to know when you're getting a good deal. Second, once you've found the apartment you really like, get as much information as you can about other rents in that complex. And if you can't get other rents in that complex, try to get comparable rents in that neighborhood. Let me share a story with you about when I was looking for an apartment for my last year of law school. So this was many years ago. And I found an apartment in an 11-unit building, and at the time, the landlady was asking for $1,800 a month. So what I did is I actually rang the doorbell of every other unit in that building, and I asked people what they were paying in rent. Now, as you can imagine, some people were like, okay, weirdo. But other people actually told me the rent. And then it turns out that in most cities, and certainly in Cambridge, Massachusetts, you can actually go to the tax assessor's office and you could get floor plans of each unit in a building. And the reason why is that they use those floor plans to determine the property tax. And so that is what I did. I got a floor plan of the other 10 units in this building. And then I built an Excel spreadsheet. And then I went back to the landlady and I asked her, help me understand how you arrived at $1,800 a month. And so what I was really doing there was using the idea of criteria. I was trying to make sure that I wasn't just paying an arbitrary or random amount of money. She looked at me and was like, how about $1,700? And so what she was doing there was inviting a haggle, but I didn't want to haggle with her. And so I said, well, I'd be willing to pay $1,800 or $1,700. What I really want to avoid is getting into a haggle with you. And so she looked at me again in this kind of confused way. And then I said, I've done a little research, and I think an appropriate amount for this particular unit would be $1,369.84. Let me explain how I arrived at that number. And then I used the comparables that I had researched to show her why $1,369.84 was a fair and appropriate number. About 90 seconds into this conversation, she looks at me and she says, okay, $1,369.84 it is. Now, I got to tell you, as a second-year law student beginning his last year in law school, I was like, what? I was like, this is crazy. But in retrospect, this actually makes a lot of sense because there is research that has shown that when you have a very precise number with a reason to it, people find that very persuasive. And so if there are ways that I can get comparables that are very, very closely related to the actual rent of the unit that I want to live in, that is going to be really useful. Third, when I'm thinking about a negotiation over rent, I want to expand the range of possible things we're negotiating to consider other intangibles. So what do I mean by that? Well, maybe being able to guarantee that I will always pay the rent on time. Maybe I'm willing to live here for more than 1 year, and that might be really valuable to the landlord. Or maybe I can make some guarantees around my usage of the apartment. So I will give you another story, flash forward almost 15 years later, when I am looking to rent an apartment in New York for my sabbatical. And I found this really, really beautiful unit that ordinarily would be completely outside of my price range. It was nicely appointed, it had artwork, it had really nice wine in there. So I was able to do a little research on the owner of this building, and I found out that he had just started a startup in Boston, and this is why he was renting the New York apartment. Apparently he had previously rented it to somebody who had made a lot of damage to the unit. And so one of the things he was really concerned about was having somebody in there who would treat his artwork and his property with a great deal of care. And so what I was able to say to him is to say, hey, I am an incredibly boring Harvard Law School professor. Most of the time I'm here, I'm going to be in an office at NYU Law School doing some writing. If you're willing to give me a somewhat lower price, I can guarantee to you that I am not going to have any big parties here, that I'm going to take very good care of the rent, and that I won't be drinking any of your very clearly expensive wine. Well, he loved that. I got an incredible price for the apartment, and bonus, he said, please drink all of the wine that you'd like. Last really important point here is whenever possible, seek to improve your B.A.T.N.A before beginning the negotiation over rent. So what do I mean by B.A.T.N.A here? Your B.A.T.N.A is your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. It's the thing you're gonna do if you don't reach an agreement. So in this apartment example, if I don't reach an agreement on the rent, where am I gonna live? Am I gonna stay in Chicago instead of moving to LA? Am I gonna live on the street? Or do I have another unit that's maybe not quite as good as the one I want, but actually better than staying in Chicago or living on the street? Before I begin the negotiation with a landlord, I want to get the best possible B.A.T.N.A I can. In other words, I want an alternative that makes me stronger in the negotiation with the other side. Now, to be clear, if you are looking for an apartment in a very hot real estate market, the fact that you have a strong B.A.T.N.A may not make much of a difference, because if that landlord can simply rent the unit 10 seconds later to somebody else who's online, it doesn't really matter what your B.A.T.N.A is. But in most situations, the stronger the B.A.T.N.A you have, the better will be your hand across the negotiation table. So to review, first, if you're wondering, can you negotiate your rent? The answer is yes. If you do not try, you will not succeed. If you try, the worst possible thing is you'll be told no. Once you made that decision, here are the 4 tips. First, do your market research before you start looking. Second, once you identify the unit you want, get as much information as you can about other comparable rents and use that in your negotiation. Third, consider other intangibles as a way to create value and incentivize the landlord to make some concessions on the rent. And fourth, improve your B.A.T.N.A, improve your away from the table alternative. If you want to keep on learning how to improve a negotiation, watch this next video, which is how do I negotiate when the other side has more power? Okay, keep watching. Click, 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 click.